IT Hero Podcast Show. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 13th episode of our IT Hero Podcast Show. For a lot of people, 13 could not be a favorite number, but for me, it's going to be a lucky number because of the person who we are going to interview today. So today's guest, who is an international renowned thought leader in cloud industry, who has spent more than 25 years teaching enterprises across all industries on how to use technology resources more productively. And I'm super happy to invite the Chief Cloud Strategy Officer of Deloitte and a famous author and a best-selling author and a speaker. And let's give a big round of applause to welcome David Linthicum on the show. Hi, David.
Well, hello, Raj. Thank you very much. That was a great introduction. I should hire you for my meetings. Just send you in maybe 10 minutes before.
I'd be happy to be there. So, David, I am doing this podcast as an educational purposes. I am stepping into the cloud world myself. I was into the VMware background for almost 6-7 years. So while I'm learning, I was Googling and finding resources, and I found your resources both online and videos or books. It's a wealth of information. I'm going to ask you questions based on how somebody can get into the cloud industry.
Well, it's funny. I was thinking about that for some other research I was doing, because it's a little bit different than it was like, 10, 15 years ago, or if you just knew anything about cloud, whether it was software as a service or infrastructure as a service, there wasn't a ton out there to know. And it was a fairly easy career path to get into. Now really, this is about specialization and, picking an area that you're going to focus on. And so, and then being very good at what that area is able to provide and things that you need to learn. So really, this is about you figuring out what your passions are in terms of different technologies that are associated with cloud. Now, you can certainly be a cloud architect, which means you're going to be a generalist and understand a lot about a few things and know how to assemble these things into a solution. And that's why they're typically the highest paid and the most in demand right now, because people who have experience and can understand most things about how clouds are leveraged, and also legacy systems and existing networking, that's going to be highest value. But the reality is you can take a database specialist, you can be a cloud database specialist where you focus on, different database technologies, or even focus on a single specific database. You can be an AI specialist focused on a specific technology with a cloud provider. You can focus on a cloud provider, in other words, Google, Microsoft, or Amazon. So instead of focusing on all of them, you're focusing on one and you're getting the certifications there.
Yeah.
So there's probably 5 factorial of clear career paths you can do in the cloud now. And it's fairly numerous and it's fairly involved. But the reality is that people who get into cloud, I always tell them this: specialize, figure out what you like about aspects about cloud computing, learn all you can about that, gain the skills, and then start getting the on the job training. And that's the way teams are focused right now. When I have an architecture team that I bring to a client, it's going to be different specializations that they're able to bring, not necessarily everybody just understanding everything about cloud. I think that's an impossibility at this point.
If somebody's getting into the cloud world, or somebody's into a legacy, like a system admin or a Linux admin who wants to step into the cloud world, how can they start? Which cloud should I pick? Is it AWS or Azure? And there are lots and lots of vendors coming out.
Well, I would pick the cloud that is being leveraged the most by the people you want to work for. So if you're working as a legacy specialist, you want to work for the same company as a cloud specialist, and look around and see what clouds they're leveraging and what skills are going to be more in demand, and then take the initiative to take the certification training or the training unto yourself, nights and weekends or whatever it takes to get the knowledge you need to kind of talk your way into the first job. Obviously, AWS is the majority of the market share out there, so that's going to be greater in demand just because the number of job postings are going to be related to the number of organizations that have adopted AWS as their cloud standard. However, in moving into a multi-cloud world, we're going to find that even folks that are all in with AWS are still going to have some Microsoft and Google around. And those may be skills that may be in higher demand because of the rise in those markets than, just understanding AWS. So it's kind of tough to tell people to focus on a particular cloud brand when, if you look at the acceleration in the market around Microsoft, acceleration in the market around Google, just focusing on AWS because of the popularity of it may leave some money on the table when it comes to the demand around the other cloud providers.
Yeah.
But also work with the cloud provider that you want to work with. In other words, ones that really kind of cater to your interest and cater to your passions.
Mhm. Right. So if somebody is thinking that I don't want to get into cloud because I'm happy with the legacy, and there's a tiny bit of customers still going to stick with that. So do you think we can out cloud the cloud anyway?
Out cloud the cloud. What do you mean by that?
I mean, I don't want to get into the cloud at all. I'm really happy supporting data centers, and I can stick with the legacy system itself. Is it possible to do that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. If you look at the number of people around who support traditional infrastructure and support traditional legacy systems, it's diminishing. The people are leaving the workforce, they're retiring or are moving out. And of course, people who come into the workforce, colleges, universities, or direct training, or even cross skilling within enterprises, don't really target legacy systems as something that they want to have as a career path. So if someone really enjoys doing legacy stuff, and I've done that for a larger portion of my career, I tell them just go ahead and stick with it. That doesn't mean you shouldn't understand other technologies, how the cloud works, and different technologies and how they work and play well together. But the thing is, if you want to specialize in mainframe systems, you want to specialize in traditional Linux systems and data centers, traditional cores, lamp stacks, things like that, you're always going to have a job. I just don't see that the demand diminishing from that. Obviously, the cloud is going to be a bit more of a hotter skill right now, but eventually it normalizes.
Got it. Thank you. Now, one of your article, I'm a big fan of your articles, and I'm going to post all of the links down for the viewers to have a look at your articles. And one such article where it made me thinking is about why enterprises waste money in cloud. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that came out of some research that was done with the State of Cloud report that's put out every year by a very prominent vendor, and they found, I think, what a lot of people are seeing is that as people deploy clouds kind of haphazardly, and they do so at a very accelerated rate, almost a panic, since the pandemic started, people realized they were exposed in not having systems in the cloud because they were vulnerable to lockdowns and quarantines and things like that. So they made a mass movement into the cloud. Haven't really thought about how you're going to do FinOps and cost governance and how you're going to monitor and control these expenditures in the cloud. They're doing so from a couple of things. Number one, they're just not having the processes and disciplines in place and the tools in place to monitor and manage cloud costs, ongoing operational costs, but also may not be picking the most optimized solution. So they're getting something that works fairly quickly, but the reality is that may not be the solution that's going to make the most money or have the most value or cost the least and provide the most value to the business. And that's where we're leaving money on the table. And it's huge amounts. And so I suspect a lot of these businesses are going to realize that they're much more inefficient, much more wasteful than they really should be. End up having audits and different layers of people who come in, audit their processes, layer this tools and technology in there, and also normalize some of the architectural issues that they've created that need to be fixed.
And you also talked about research that shows that 50% of IT budgets in future, about 2025, would go into cloud-based systems.
Yeah, that's going to be the case. Where by 2025. We'll hit the tipping point where the majority of money is going to be spent on cloud-based systems. That's just the way things are going to evolve. I don't think everything is going to move into cloud. I think a certain amount of legacy stickiness is going to be around, and we're going to hit a saturation point, at about between 70 and 80% of things migrated. So that's probably 15 years off based on the pace in which we're going. So. Suddenly we realize that the majority of systems are in the cloud, and cloud is really going to normalize and just be part of technology. I think we probably won't have been talking about cloud in 5 years. Just talking about a different consumption pattern using technology, it's automatically going to be assumed that we're going to be leveraging these things from a public cloud provider. And I think that's good. And this is going to probably bring more benefit than problems, because we're able, through economies of scale, provide the same sort of processing power and different applications and technology services like AI and things like that at a lower cost point, And it's going to be as a service. We're only paying for what we need, which is something I think that is going to benefit the industry as a whole. Also, fewer outages, because if you've dealt with enterprises before, they have a lot of internal outages. Public cloud providers not as much. They're better at running the infrastructure and also better at sharing data center space. Everybody has had a knee-jerk reaction to when they started a business to build a data center, and those things take as much power as a small town. And the reality is we weren't sharing that infrastructure efficiently. So we're having one company owning a particular data center provider. And I guarantee if you did a performance monitor on all these various systems in there, they'd be at 1 to 3% utilization. Well, the cloud typically can get to 80 to 100% utilization with the same hardware stack. And through the shareability of that hardware, we can do a ton more with less. In other words, we're not having a significant carbon impact, as we did with more of a traditional infrastructure. So there's things to be said about the sustainability of cloud computing moving forward is kind of a better thing. Certainly the cost advantage, the utility advantage, and certainly the ability to leverage cloud as a force multiplier, which is what we're doing right now. It's only going to grow, but it will grow to a certain amount. And I don't think it's a lot of the existing legacy systems going to go away completely, but we're going to have to make sure we're working and playing well together.
David, I'm curious about this particular point about VMware, because I worked in VMware for a long time, and I see customers, moving from VMware to cloud. On the other hand, I have seen a couple of customers moving from cloud to back to data center. And how do you see such customers?
I see this called repatriation, and I think we're seeing a bit of that today because people, as we mentioned earlier, move to the cloud for the wrong reasons and perhaps move the wrong application workloads and data storage systems to the cloud and realize that they need to repatriate that right now. So VMware looks like they're supporting a multi-cloud role, which is, and you're always going to have an enterprise footprint, and that's typically going to have virtualization and other management systems, things that VMware does well. Yeah. And your ability to move workloads back and forth from traditional traditional infrastructure to the cloud and then back to traditional infrastructure, I think should be well understood as where we're going to move going forward, because not all things are destined to be in the cloud, and some things have a good value in the cloud, some things have a better value on a traditional system. And I think that the ability to do both well and provide a common path between these two infrastructures is really going to make companies like VMware, but all the other enterprise companies as well, more viable moving forward. So they're playing their role in the emerging market and really kind of owning a particular space that I think is going to grow pretty well.
And the reason why they moved back, I should have mentioned, is because they had a lot of complex DR solutions which they couldn't achieve in cloud. And VMware has a proprietary tool called SRM, Site Recovery Manager. So they were pretty happy with this, and they couldn't, do much with the cloud disaster recovery. Maybe it's not architected properly. So that's the reason they came back to legacy system.
Well, I think everybody follows a path that they think the customers are going to be following, and they're no different. And I think that a lot of big enterprise players, they're one of many that are out there that have been watching for many years, dealing with multi-cloud deployments, and the ability to take care of the existing infrastructure, which in many instances we just mentioned isn't going to go away. And that's a big role to play. I think that over time, even the hyperscalers, the big cloud providers will commoditize a bit. In other words, their storage systems and their processing systems, things like that, will start to look very much the same. There's a few things they can do to add value to that, but it's going to be compute layers. And so they're going to build stuff on top of that, which is going to be more value added. And the same thing with the enterprise players. So pretty soon they're going to play bits and pieces on existing legacy traditional systems, bits and pieces in the cloud. And I think the hyperscalers are going to play in both roles either. If you look at the edge-based clouds that are out there right now, Outpost and Stack being instances of that, they have enterprise plays. And I think there's all this cross-pollination is going to occur with the existing players and the hyperscalers. And I think it's a good thing. People are stepping up and solving the problems that I think people need to solve.
True, totally agree with you on that. David. So switching gears to the last portion, I am curious to know how do you keep up with your knowledge in cloud? What are your top resources?
Well, I mean, having to push two blogs every week is a good way to keep up because obviously you have to post
Uh,
something that's interesting and new.
yeah,
So you do the constant reading about that. I have the Google alert that says cloud computing, cloud architecture,
yeah.
and I read the articles that pop up and where the trends are going, and
Mhm,
also work with a large amount of smart people at Deloitte. One of the reasons I work here is my peers are geniuses. They know about this stuff. They can do the analysis of it, and
mhm,
just stepping up the game in terms of the intellectual, conversations that we have around how to utilize this technology, and everything's peer reviewed, and you can criticize people without,
mhm.
worry about retribution, and have good ideas and bad ideas and have them, kind of work their way through the system. So it's a couple, just reading what you can out there. Pick your favorite two or three cloud blogs.
Mm,
Podcasts are good. Even YouTube has some good cloud content on it. Take your courses that you need to take.
mhm.
But once you get this flow and interest and this passion for it, you'll find that keeping up's a relatively easy thing to do. And I follow that. I follow my passion. My passion is new technology, not just cloud,
Yeah.
where things are going, how people are using the stuff, where the stumbling blocks are.
Mhm,
And I think the role I have is more of a pundit and providing a pragmatic
mhm.
analysis as to what the real value to this cloud is. I never get on boats, on bandwagons, and those sorts of things. I always take a skeptical eye to how we're going to leverage this technology.
Yeah.
So if I have positive things to say, they're typically positive, but I'm always going to have, positive and negative things to say about everything that's out there, inclusive of cloud.
Right. I'm really curious to know about that because, you're someone who produces knowledge, and I was curious, how do you consume knowledge? So that's interesting. And based on your previous books, I am also interested to know when is your next book coming up? I think it's a long time that you released a book.
Yeah, I'm writing a book this year. I kind of gave up on books back in 2010. They just weren't as interesting as doing the blogs and the
Okay.
podcasts and things like that, where you get the immediate feedback. You got to remember, books used to take a year to write. It would take 6 months to write the book,
Yeah.
and then 6 months or 8 months to get the thing through the publisher and get the editing done and get the thing bound and then out the door and up on Amazon and the other booksellers. It's a little less time now, but I'm going to go ahead and write a book because I think have one more in me. I'm going to write a book about the what the cloud industry typically doesn't tell you. So in other words, view from an insider.
Okay.
So if you like my blogs, you like the podcasts, this thing is going to be a complete book with deeper dives and deeper data references into what's actually happening in the cloud computing industry, how to succeed with it, steps to get things right, how to pick the right solutions, architectural secrets, that are out there, and things that are not very
Mhm,
well understood. Because I think you got to remember, there's folks like me, and there's dozens of folks who write about the pragmatic aspects of this stuff. But there's
mhm,
also a $100 billion marketing budget
mhm.
that the cloud providers are leveraging, and it's tough to get above that noise. Very powerful market, and certainly the magazines have
Mhm.
diminished in their value. They're now about clickbait things like that. And
Mhm.
so the book is really to kind of cut through the fog in terms of what's working, what's not,
Yeah.
what to look for in cloud computing, and also
Yeah.
uh, just put away a lot of the myths I think that are occurring around this technology right now.
Lovely. Thank you so much, David. I will be looking forward for the book. And thank you so much. We're at the end of the show now. I really appreciate all your time and your information that you've shared with us today. Really happy having you on the show. Thank you so much.
You got it, Raj.
IT Hero Podcast Show.